Did you say over? Nothing is over until we decide it is.
It's the fall of 1978, and theaters across the country are packed with people howling at a toga party, a food fight, and a parade gone completely off the rails. For decades, plenty of people have half remembered this movie as harmless, goofy college comedy. It wasn't. This is why Animal House, 1978, was never really a kid's movie. Born from an adult magazine, not a studio. Long before Animal House reached theaters, its entire sensibility had already been shaped by a magazine built specifically for grown readers. National Lampoon launched in April of 1970, founded by Harvard graduates Doug Kenney, Henry Beard, and Robert Hoffman, all veterans of the century-old Harvard Lampoon. Kenney and Beard had already made a name for themselves while still at Harvard, publishing successful national parodies of Time and Life magazines, followed by a best-selling Tolkien parody titled Board of the Rings, well before they ever launched their own standalone publication. That early success gave the pair genuine confidence that a national audience existed for exactly the kind of sharp, irreverent satire they had already been perfecting for a much smaller college readership. From its very first issue, the magazine positioned itself as a humor publication for adults who had outgrown gentler satire, built on a steady diet of irreverence toward institutions, authority figures, and cultural pieties with a cynicism that assumed greed, stupidity, or malice behind most human behavior rather than good intentions. That first issue, dated April 1970, sold less than half of its initial 500,000 copy print run, but the magazine's circulation climbed steadily over the following years, eventually surpassing 1 million copies sold in a single month by 1974. By the time the magazine's writers turned their attention toward Hollywood later that decade, National Lampoon had spent nearly a full decade establishing exactly the kind of adult, comedic voice that would eventually define Animal House on screen. The magazine's roster of contributors during this period reads like a genuine training ground for an entire generation of American comedy, with staff and freelance writers who would go on to shape Saturday Night Live, the Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman comedies of the following decade, and much of the broader raunchy comedy landscape that Hollywood continued mining for years afterward. That same sensibility carried directly into the film. The screenplay, credited to Kenney, Chris Miller, and Harold Ramis, wasn't invented from scratch for Hollywood. It grew out of stories Miller had already published in National Lampoon, drawn from his own fraternity experience at Alpha Delta Phi at Dartmouth College. Combined with Ramis's time in the Zeta Beta Tau fraternity at Washington University in St. Louis, and producer Ivan Reitman's own college years at McMaster University in Ontario. In other words, before a single frame was shot, the material had already been written, rewritten, and refined for the pages of a magazine explicitly marketed to adults, not for a family audience sitting in a theater on a Saturday afternoon. The film simply took stories that had already proven themselves funny to a readership of grown adults and translated them faithfully onto the screen. An R rating from the start. Animal House was released with an R rating, and that rating wasn't a technicality. The film includes nudity, both male and female, frequent profanity, and sexual content woven directly into its plot rather than tucked into a background joke or two. According to later parental guidance breakdowns of the film's content, viewers can expect naked breasts, naked buttocks, and sexual situations played for open, unapologetic laughs rather than any kind of restraint. The film's language is similarly unfiltered throughout, with a steady stream of profanity running from its opening scenes straight through to its climactic parade sequence. This wasn't a studio quietly slipping in a few edgy jokes to seem cool.
We're going to grab the bull by the balls and kick those punks off campus.
It was a film built from the ground up around exactly the kind of content an R rating exists to flag for parents. That rating matters for understanding the film's original intent. Unlike broader studio comedies of the same period designed to appeal across age groups, Animal House was explicitly engineered around material an adult audience, specifically one already familiar with National Lampoon's brand of humor, would find funny. The drinking depicted throughout the film is heavy and constant, treated as an unqualified good rather than something requiring any narrative consequence. And the hazing rituals shown during the fraternity's pledge process include a fair amount of genuine physical roughness, played entirely for laughs. Younger viewers who did sneak into theaters, and there were certainly plenty who did over the following years on cable and home video, were watching something never designed with them in mind at all. Content that theater staff and studio marketing alike understood from the outset was intended strictly for adult moviegoers. It's worth noting that the Motion Picture Association's rating system was still a relatively young institution by 1978, having only replaced the old Hollywood production code roughly a decade earlier, and R-rated comedies of this scale and box office ambition were still a fairly novel proposition for a major studio to bet on. Universal's willingness to release Animal House with its rating fully intact, rather than pushing for cuts to secure a broader PG classification, reflects just how confident the studio ultimately became that the film's target adult audience alone would be large enough to make the project a genuine commercial success.
7 years of college down the drain.
A post-Watergate argument for chaos. Setting the film in 1962 wasn't a random choice, and neither was releasing it in 1978. By the time Animal House hit theaters, the country had spent most of the previous decade absorbing the fallout from the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, both of which left a lasting public skepticism toward institutions that had once commanded automatic respect, universities, government, and traditional authority figures among them. Setting the story a full 16 years in the past, right before that disillusionment set in, allowed the filmmakers to satirize the buttoned-up conformity of the early 1960s from the vantage point of an audience that had already lived through the years that shattered it. The film's entire structure plays directly into that mood, pitting the rule-breaking, hedonistic Delta Tau Chi fraternity against Dean Vernon Wormer, played by John Vernon, and his favored buttoned-up Omega Theta Pi fraternity. Where a more conventional comedy might have found some middle ground between order and chaos, Animal House stacks its sympathies almost entirely on the side of disorder. Dean Wormer and the Omegas are framed as smug, controlling, and quietly authoritarian, while the Deltas, despite being drunks, underachievers, and outright troublemakers, are positioned as the film's heroes simply for refusing to fall in line. It's a distinctly adult, post-Watergate kind of argument. Institutions deserve mockery and defiance rather than automatic deference, dressed up in beer kegs and togas rather than political rhetoric.
Remain calm! All is well!
One film critic, revisiting the movie decades later, went so far as to describe its underlying message as among the most brazen anti-establishment statements to reach mainstream movie screens in the years between the classic satires of old Hollywood and the darker studio comedies that would eventually follow it. That's not the kind of thematic backbone typically built into entertainment aimed at children, and it wasn't meant to be. This underlying skepticism toward authority wasn't unique to Animal House alone either. It ran throughout much of National Lampoon's broader output during the 1970s, extending into the magazine's later film projects and reflecting a wider trend across American comedy during the decade, one shaped directly by a young adult audience that had come of age watching a president resign in disgrace and a deeply unpopular war finally draw to a close. Comedy built around distrust of institutions resonated precisely because it was speaking to viewers who had genuine, recent reasons for that distrust, reasons a younger audience without that same lived experience simply wouldn't have shared in quite the same way. A cast built for grown-up comedy. The cast Landis assembled reinforces just how far this film sat from typical family entertainment of the era. John Belushi, the film's biggest name at the time, had built his reputation as an original cast member of Saturday Night Live, itself a late-night sketch show built specifically for adult audiences, and known for pushing well past the boundaries of conventional network comedy.
This could be the greatest night of our lives, but you're gonna let it be the worst.
Belushi split his time during filming between the Animal House set and his weekend duties back in New York for Saturday Night Live, spending 3 days a week in Oregon before flying back east to tape the live show, a demanding schedule that speaks to just how tightly the film's production was tied to a broader wave of adult-oriented comedy already reshaping American entertainment at the time. Beyond Belushi, most of the younger cast were relative unknowns at the time, including Tim Matheson, Peter Riegert, Karen Allen, and Thomas Hulsey, all cast well before any of them had established significant Hollywood careers. Landis reportedly encouraged genuine rivalry between the actors playing the Deltas and the actors playing the more uptight Omegas throughout the shoot, a dynamic that carried over naturally into the finished film's on-screen tension between the two houses. The film also marked the screen debut of a young Kevin Bacon, cast in the small role of Chip Diller, an Omega pledge, years before he became a recognizable leading man in his own right. Donald Sutherland, already an established star by 1978, joined the cast as Professor Dave Jennings, reportedly choosing a flat fee over a share of the film's profits because he didn't expect the movie to perform particularly well, a decision he later said he regretted once the film became a genuine box office phenomenon.
Excuse me, sir, is this the Delta House?
Sure. Come on in.
Sutherland's involvement was reportedly a key factor in convincing Universal Pictures to distribute the film in the first place, giving the largely unproven first-time production a degree of credibility it might otherwise have struggled to secure from a major studio. Taken together, this casting strategy reinforces the film's underlying identity in yet another way. Rather than building the film around established stars comfortable with mainstream, broadly appealing material, Landis and the producers assembled a cast drawn heavily from the ranks of adult sketch comedy, unproven young actors willing to embrace genuinely raunchy material, and character actors like Vernon and Sutherland, who brought a wry, knowing edge to their supporting roles. It was a cast built to serve the material's adult sensibility first, with any resulting stardom for its younger members arriving only as a byproduct of the film's massive, unexpected success. Adult jokes wrapped in a college setting. Even setting aside the film's overall rating, several individual plot threads make clear just how squarely this story was built for grown audiences rather than a general one. One recurring joke involves Kent Flounder Dorfman being talked into loaning out his brother's car under the pretense that Otter needs it to visit the grave of his supposedly deceased girlfriend, Fawn Leibowitz, a fabricated backstory used purely as a manipulative pickup line, played entirely for its own cynicism rather than any sentimentality. The joke works precisely because it treats a fabricated tragedy as nothing more than a convenient tool for getting what a character wants. Exactly the kind of dark, cynical, comedic logic National Lampoon had built its reputation on for nearly a decade before the film ever reached theaters. Elsewhere, the film includes a subplot involving Otter's romantic pursuit of the town mayor's daughter, whose age becomes a pointed, uncomfortable punchline in its own right. The kind of material that reads very differently and considerably more troubling through a modern lens than it may have to some audiences back in 1978. It's a storyline that has drawn particular scrutiny in more recent critical reassessments of the film, cited as one of the clearest examples of content that firmly places Animal House outside the realm of anything resembling appropriate viewing for younger audiences, regardless of how casually it may have been played for laughs at the time. Beyond specific plot points, the film's overall attitude towards sex, drinking, and institutional rule-breaking is treated as an unambiguous celebration rather than a cautionary tale. Common Sense Media's own breakdown of the film notes that its comedy glorifies underage binge drinking and a casual, consequence-free approach to sex, content the organization specifically flags as material that hasn't aged particularly well, given later, more serious conversations around campus safety. The film's famous toga party sequence, its extended cafeteria food fight, and its chaotic homecoming parade finale all lean into that same spirit of gleeful, unpunished disorder, treating destructive behavior not as something to be corrected by the film's end, but as the entire point of the exercise. None of this reads as incidental. It's baked directly into what made the film funny to its intended audience in the first place, and none of it was ever likely to have made it past a studio note process designed with a broader family audience in mind. A box office hit that redefined comedy. Whatever reservations parents might have had, audiences turned out in enormous numbers. Made for a modest budget of roughly $3 million, Animal House went on to gross more than $140 million, making it the highest-grossing comedy of its era, and at the time one of the most profitable films Hollywood had ever produced, relative to its original cost. It opened on July 28, 1978, and became the second biggest hit of the year, trailing only Grease at the box office, a genuinely remarkable feat for a film built around unknown young actors, a first-time feature director, and a subject matter many studios had initially been hesitant to touch. That commercial success helped cement National Lampoon's brand well beyond the pages of its magazine, and it effectively launched an entire subgenre of raunchy college comedy that Hollywood would keep returning to for decades afterward, from Revenge of the Nerds in the following years through American Pie and Superbad much later on. None of those descendants softened the formula for younger audiences either, each one carrying its own R rating and its own set of jokes clearly built for viewers well past their teenage years, a direct inheritance from the template Animal House had established. The film's success also proved, in a way few studios had fully appreciated before, that a genuinely adult-oriented comedy, one that made no effort to broaden its appeal to a younger crowd, could still become one of the most profitable releases of its entire year. Universal's own confidence in the project had been fairly modest at the outset, agreeing to distribute the film only after Sutherland signed on, and providing producers Reitman and Matty Simmons with a budget that reflected real caution about the project's commercial prospects. The gap between that initial hesitation and the film's eventual enormous box office return stands as one of the more striking examples of a studio badly underestimating just how large an appetite existed for exactly this kind of unapologetically adult comedy. Reflecting on the film's success years later, industry observers have often pointed to Animal House as a genuine turning point, proof that a movie could skip the broad four-quadrant approach most studio comedies chased and still become one of the most profitable releases of its entire decade by speaking directly and unapologetically to grown audiences alone. Reassessing its content decades later. Watching Animal House today inevitably means watching it through a considerably different cultural lens than the one it was originally released into. Critics revisiting the film in recent years have been candid about aspects of its humor, particularly its treatment of women that reflect clearly dated attitudes from the period rather than timeless comedy. Rotten Tomatoes' own aggregated critical consensus acknowledges this tension directly, describing the film's mix of genuinely inspired comic performances alongside content that, decades later, reads as considerably more dated in its assumptions than purely nostalgic. Several of the film's female characters exist largely as objects of pursuit for the Delta brothers, with comparatively little interiority of their own, a structural choice that was rarely questioned by mainstream critics in 1978, but draws considerably more scrutiny from audiences and reviewers revisiting the film now. That reassessment doesn't erase the film's technical and comedic achievements, which critics, including Roger Ebert, praised at the time of release for its manic energy and genuine wit, comparing Belushi's screen presence favorably to earlier great physical comedians of Hollywood's past. But it does reinforce just how firmly rooted this material was, and remains, in an adult sensibility, rather than anything resembling family entertainment. A film willing to build entire jokes around subject matter this loaded was never accidentally landing in R-rated territory. It was built there deliberately by writers whose entire professional reputation had been established, putting exactly this kind of material in front of grown readers years before Hollywood ever came calling. Modern parents doing even a cursory bit of research before letting a curious teenager watch the film would find that same consistent message across every serious review and content guide written about it, regardless of the decade. A rare point of complete agreement between critics writing in 1978 and those revisiting the film nearly 50 years later. A production built around real chaos. Filming took place in the fall of 1977, largely on and around the campus of the University of Oregon in Eugene, after producers and director John Landis were turned away by several other schools, including the University of Missouri. Once administrators got a look at the nature of the material they'd be hosting on their campus, The production used two real fraternity houses in Eugene for its Delta and Omega locations, along with roughly 200 local residents recruited as extras to help fill out the film's crowded party and parade sequences. Landis, still a relatively young director at the time with only a handful of earlier credits to his name, encouraged a genuine sense of rivalry to develop between the actors playing the Deltas and those playing the Omegas throughout the shoot, a dynamic that carried over naturally onto the screen and helped give the film's central conflict a lived-in authenticity that a more controlled, tightly scripted production might have struggled to replicate. The film's famous cafeteria food fight sequence was reportedly captured in a single take, with the actors genuinely throwing food at one another rather than relying on careful choreography or multiple safer setups, an approach that fits neatly with the same anarchic spirit driving the film's writing and overall tone. The production's low budget also meant relatively little room for the kind of careful safety oversight or sanitized presentation a bigger, more cautious studio picture might have insisted upon. Scenes involving heavy drinking, chaotic parties, and physical mayhem were shot with a loose, documentary-like energy that suited the material's raw, unpolished comedic voice. But that same approach would have looked entirely out of place in a production actually designed with younger viewers in mind. Everything about how the film was physically made, not just what it depicted on screen, reinforced the same fundamental truth. This was adult filmmaking, built by adults, for an adult audience, from its earliest planning stages straight through to its final theatrical cut, without a single compromise made along the way to broaden its appeal to anyone younger. That commitment to genuine, unpolished chaos on set mirrors the film's content in a fairly direct way. This was never a production interested in the kind of careful, family-friendly restraint that typically defines films aimed at younger viewers. From the choice of filming locations to the way scenes were captured, the entire production leaned into exactly the same unruly, adult sensibility that had already defined the material back when it existed only as stories in the pages of National Lampoon. Why it was never meant for everyone. Put all of these pieces together: the National Lampoon pedigree, the R rating built around real nudity and sexual content, the post-Watergate contempt for institutional authority, a cast pulled largely from adult-oriented sketch comedy, and plot threads that still generate real discomfort decades later, and the picture becomes fairly clear. Animal House wasn't a family comedy that happened to skew a little edgy. It was, from its earliest conception as magazine stories written for grown readers, engineered specifically for an adult audience already primed to laugh at exactly this kind of irreverence. Every layer of the production, from the writers who created it to the studio that eventually distributed it, understood exactly who this film was for, and it was never, at any stage of its development, children sitting in the audience. That's precisely why the film has aged the way it has, beloved by generations of adult fans who grew up quoting its most famous lines, while remaining title parents have generally kept well away from younger viewers, official rating, and specific content, both working in perfect agreement on that point. The film's continued popularity among adult audiences, decades removed from its original theatrical run, speaks to just how effectively it captured a very specific, grown-up comedic sensibility, one built on cynicism, chaos, and a genuine delight in watching institutional authority get thoroughly humiliated. Younger viewers discovering bits and pieces of the film through pop culture references without ever having sat through the entire thing are often getting a fairly sanitized impression of a movie that, in its full, uncut form, remains exactly as adult-oriented as it was the day it opened in the summer of 1978. That gap between the film's watered-down cultural reputation and its actual unfiltered content is worth remembering the next time someone assumes an old comedy classic must automatically be gentler than whatever passes for edgy in modern entertainment. Decades after its release, Animal House still holds its place as one of the defining comedies of its era. But it's worth remembering, especially for anyone introducing it to someone new, that it was built from the very beginning as an adult film through and through, never intended for the kids who might catch it flipping through channels decades later. Its lasting reputation as a beloved comedy classic and its status as unmistakably adult entertainment were never in conflict with each other. They were, from the very start, exactly the same thing. Before you go, if Animal House was part of your own college years, or you're revisiting it now with fresh eyes, drop a comment and share what still holds up for you. And if you enjoyed this look back, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the classic comedies that shaped a generation.